This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Friday evening. I'm Oteli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken addresses ASEAN leaders on multiple fronts, including the importance of strengthening ties with the bloc, while also calling out Beijing's actions in the South China Sea. Meet us halfway. Chinese Premier Li Qiang, in talks with Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba at the ASEAN Summit, urges cooperation to stabilize bilateral ties. And this year's Nobel Peace Prize goes to Japan's Nihon Hidankyo, a group of atomic bomb survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki fighting for a world free of nuclear weapons. And the EU chief calls on China to adapt its behaviour to prevent a tariff spat from escalating into a full-blown trade war. Caught between the oil industry and environmentalists, Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris walks a tightrope on fracking. We drill down to see how the issue is playing out in the U.S. election campaign. And hundreds of thousands of children in China disappear each year, but the vastness of the country makes it virtually impossible to find them. We look at their parents' relentless search for their loved ones. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has stressed developing strong ties with ASEAN during his meetings with the bloc and partners in Vientiane, the capital city of Laos. The top U.S. diplomat, responding to regional tensions, also called out Beijing's actions in the disputed waters of the South China Sea and beyond.
We remain concerned about China's increasingly dangerous and unlawful actions in the South and East China Seas, which have injured people, harmed vessels from ASEAN nations, and contradict commitments to peaceful resolution of disputes. The United States will continue to support freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight in the Indo-Pacific. We also believe it's important to maintain our shared commitment to protect stability across the Taiwan Strait.
Mr. Blinken separately weighed in on heightened tensions between China and Taiwan, noting that Beijing had reacted angrily to Taiwan President William Lai's National Day speech, in which he had vowed that the island will resist annexation by China.
On Taiwan, what was also striking, again, is almost across the board, the strong desire for all of the ASEAN countries, and this extends well beyond ASEAN, but the countries in the room to see that peace and stability is maintained across the Taiwan Strait. And I can tell you that with regard to the so-called 10-10 speech, which is a regular exercise, China should not use it in any fashion as a pretext for provocative actions.
Mr. Blinken was attending the ASEAN Summit on behalf of U.S. President Joe Biden. And this is the second time Mr. Biden has skipped the event. Observers say Mr. Biden's absence in Laos could be a sign of Washington's waning engagement with the region. But Mr. Blinken stressed that Washington remains committed and underscored the strong relations while seeking to dispel lingering uncertainty, especially with the looming elections in the U.S.
Our focus has remained intensely on this region. And again, it's because it's so critical to our own future, to the lives and livelihoods of Americans. So given that, it's my belief that that basic approach will continue, irrespective of who's president, because it's so manifestly in our interests.
Well, staying at the ASEAN Summit in Laos, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has used his sideline meeting with Chinese Premier Li Qiang to demand answers about an airspace intrusion by a Chinese spy plane back in August. Japan's foreign ministry says Mr. Ishiba raised his concerns about China's intensifying military activities in the East China Sea and around Japan. And he has also asked China to ensure the safety of Japanese nationals after a Japanese schoolboy was stabbed and killed in Shenzhen last month. The Japanese leader has in the past called for an Asian NATO, and yesterday Chinese Premier Li Qiang warned against attempts to introduce a bloc confrontation into Asia. In their one-on-one talks, Mr. Li said he hopes Japan can meet China halfway.
们也希望双方能够一道更多的相向而行，持续巩固政治互信，不断的加强对话合作，努力构建切合新时代要求的建设性的、稳定的中日关系。
日中両国には協力の潜在性と課題、懸案がありますが、両政府の努力を通じて、両国民が関係発展の果実を得られますよう、緊張とともに取り組めばと思っております。
And for more insights on the meetings, we will be speaking with Sharon Sia later this bulletin. She's the coordinator and senior fellow of the ASEAN Studies Center at IC's Yusof Ishak Institute. So do stay tuned in East Asia Tonight for that. Following the ASEAN Summit in Laos, Lee Chiang will head to Hanoi this weekend for an official visit at the invitation of his Vietnamese counterpart. Tong No reports on what Vietnam is likely to be seeking during the Chinese premier's visit.
This will be Mr. Lee Chiang's first visit to Hanoi as Chinese premier, following a series of recent trips by top Vietnamese leaders to China.
I think this visit is very important because it aims to enhance the party-to-party relationship between the Chinese Communist Party and the Vietnamese Communist Party a year after the agreement to upgrade the bilateral tie to the community with shared future. And also in the background of recent visits by respective Vietnamese leaders, the new General Secretary To Lam and Prime Minister Phạm Minh Chính.
In Hanoi, Mr. Lee is expected to meet key Vietnamese leaders, and discussions are expected to focus on trade and economic cooperation. Experts say the visit will also aim to further the China-Vietnam community with a shared future, an agreement reached when Chinese President Xi Jinping visited last December.
Trong đó thì tôi rất là quan tâm là một số cái dự án về kết nối giữa Việt Nam và Trung Quốc, gọi là kết nối chiến lược Việt Nam và Trung Quốc. Ở đây tôi muốn nói một cái dự án mà rất là quan trọng, đó là dự án kết nối đường sắt giữa hai bên.
The future of this railway could be a major focus during Mr. Lee's talks in Hanoi. The tracks were originally laid by the French when Vietnam was still a colony a century ago, and they are set to be transformed into a modern system connecting China with Vietnam's key economic hubs, stretching across northern regions where many industries are based, to the seaport of Hai Phong. The $11 billion project, covering nearly 400 kilometers, is expected to begin construction within the next 3 years. And it is part of China's larger Belt and Road Initiative.
Nói đường sắt nhìn về lâu về dài, không phải chỉ kết nối giữa Việt Nam với Trung Quốc mà là Việt Nam với châu Âu, Việt Nam với các nước khác đi qua Trung Quốc bằng cái đường sắt đó.
Both sides are expected to iron out the details of their cooperation, including investment sources and the technical aspects of the railway.
I think this is very important for China because in Southeast Asia, if you look around, Vietnam remains one of the very few countries that are not really receptive to Chinese Belt Road Initiative. So the Chinese side might want Vietnam to commit more to the Chinese, ambition of building a China-led infrastructure project across Asia.
China is not only an increasingly important source of foreign investment, it is also Vietnam's largest trade partner. And Vietnam could request for greater market access for Vietnamese products to address its widening trade deficit with China, which reached nearly $40 billion in the first half of this year. Mr. Lee is arriving in Vietnam shortly after tensions rose in the South China Sea. Just 2 weeks ago, Hanoi said 10 Vietnamese fishermen were assaulted when Chinese law enforcement personnel boarded their boat in the disputed Paracel Islands. But analysts say Vietnam will likely try to separate the dispute from its vital economic ties with China.
A very important point that I want to make is that although those incidents have happened in the past, but I think since at least 2020, the Vietnamese authorities have not really made public those cases. So I think the way that they really make public the cases to the media, to not only domestic media, but also international media, and also demanding the Chinese authority to show some kind of accountability to the incident, I think speak a lot of volume. I think this might be a significant signal to show that under the new leadership of Tô Lâm, Vietnam might be more willing to stand up to China.
Vietnam's new leadership is taking shape after much political change this year.
It is important to note that the Vietnamese leadership transition is still ongoing, and we still have 1 year on to the next party congress where the new leadership will be elected. So I think in Vietnam, there had always been a feeling that the new leadership in Hanoi must know how to navigate their relationship with China really well. So I think it will be a significant point for the Vietnamese leadership now in Hanoi to see how they can deal with Beijing. And that would be a significant signal, not only to Beijing, but also for the domestic audience in Vietnam as well.
Mr. Lee leaves Hanoi on Monday as the two communist neighbors look ahead to a milestone in bilateral relations. Next January, China will mark 75 years of diplomatic ties with Vietnam, just months after it marked its 75th National Day. Tùng Ngô, CNA, Hanoi.
South Korea's military confirmed it has in its custody a suspected North Korean defector that crossed the maritime border last month. Yonhap News Agency, citing a military official, says the incident involved a North Korean man escaping aboard a wooden boat. He crossed the northern limit line near South Korea's border island of Byongyong in the early hours of 17th of September. Well, the announcement of the latest defection comes just 2 days after North Korea's military said it would permanently shut off and block the southern border. Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Kim Yong-soo told lawmakers on Thursday that the North's latest moves could be intended to stop defectors from reaching the south. There have been 2 other defections recently, both reported by Seoul in August. One was across the heavily fortified inter-Korean land border, while the other was through the neutral zone of the Han River estuary. In other news, Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif has vowed to root out all forms of terrorism after an attack on a private coal mine in the province of Balochistan, which killed at least 20 miners and injured 7 others. The deadly assault comes as Pakistan prepares to host the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Islamabad next week. Well, no group has claimed responsibility for today's attack in the Duki district east of Quetta. But the mineral-rich region has been troubled for decades as Baloch insurgent groups fight against the state, saying that it denies them their share of regional resources. Relatives of the victims identified their bodies at this hospital, and police say about 40 heavily armed men struck the miners' accommodation just after midnight, rounding up the men before opening fire on them. The attackers also fired rockets and grenades at the coal mine and set the mining machinery on fire before fleeing. Most of the miners were from Pushtun-speaking areas of Balochistan. Local shop owners are angry over the killings and have shuttered their stores for a day-long strike. Pakistan has seen a resurgence of Islamist militancy since 2022, when a ceasefire between the Pakistani Taliban and the government broke down. Earlier this week, an explosion in Karachi killed 2 Chinese nationals working for a power plant. Insurgent group the Baloch Liberation Army said it was behind the blast. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Chinese stock markets ending the week in the red as caution reigns ahead of a highly anticipated government briefing tomorrow. Our China correspondent has a preview of what investors are hoping for. And South Korea's central bank trims interest rates for the first time in more than 3 years. Hello again. Good to have your company in East Asia tonight, this Friday evening. It is now time for your business news. And Roland here is standing by. Tell us a little bit more about the Chinese Premier Li Qiang. He met the EC president in Laos. What were some of the conversations that went on?
Well, the EU chief, that's Charles Michel, called on China to, quote, adapt its behaviour to resolve the tariff spat. Now, he warned of the risk that the dispute could escalate into a full-blown trade war. Mr. Michel met with Chinese Premier Li Qiang on the sidelines of a Southeast Asian summit. Now, he said the discussions was frank and candid. And while Mr. Michel hoped for a deal could be struck in the coming days or weeks, he warned that getting there would be tough, though. On his part, Mr. Li said China was willing to keep working with EU leaders to further consolidate the stable and positive momentum of bilateral ties. Xinhua also quoted Mr. Li as urging EU institutions to formulate an objective and rational policy towards China. Now, China and the 27-member bloc are at odds over Beijing's subsidies for its industries, which Brussels says unfairly undercuts European competitors. Now, Brussels has decided to slap extra tariffs of up to 35.3% on imports of Chinese-made electric cars. Beijing has responded with new tariffs on EU-made brandy, alarming French producers. Brussels is also investigating Chinese subsidies for solar panels and wind turbines. Now, China's new brandy tariffs of up to 38.1%, officially an anti-dumping measure to protect domestic spirit producers, were due to take effect today. China imported more brandy than any other spirit back in 2022, most of it from France. And French cognac makers earlier this week pleaded for an end to the spat. Now, the EU has said it will challenge these measures at the World Trade Organization. And on to stock market action in China, where investors are looking ahead to a media conference by the finance minister tomorrow. Now, there's speculation the government may roll out a massive spending plan worth trillions of yuan. Stimulus measures unveiled at the end of last month spurred a world-beating stock rally, but hopes seem to be fading for a bazooka stimulus. Both the Shanghai Composite and the Shenzhen Component down today, leading the losses in East Asia. Markets in Hong Kong closed for a holiday. CNA's Tan Sihui has more.
Expectations are running high ahead of Finance Minister Lan Fuan's news conference on Saturday. Mr. Lan, who was appointed to the post just last October, is expected to speak to reporters at 10 a.m. local time in Beijing. According to an official invite, Mr. Lan will talk about intensifying counter-cyclical adjustments of fiscal policy to promote high-quality economic development. Mr. Lan's meeting with the press comes hot on the heels of another high-level news conference held by the People's Bank of China on 24th September, during which the central bank unveiled its most aggressive stimulus since the pandemic, which includes key rate cuts and massive liquidity support for the capital markets. While a subsequent news conference earlier this week by top economic planner, the National Development and Reform Commission, failed to impress, expectations remain high that a major fiscal stimulus package is on the cards. China's finance ministry earlier this week announced the forming of a working group with its central bank. Observers said the new mechanism is a major move in the government's efforts to support the economy, as the coordination between the two will significantly improve the consistency and effectiveness of macro policies. The central bank also followed through with its promise made last month with the launch of a 500 billion yuan swap facility to boost the capital markets on Thursday. Under the plan, eligible financial institutions, including securities companies and fund companies, can use assets such as bonds and stock ETFs as collateral to secure liquidity. It remains to be seen what measures will be unveiled by Finance Minister Lan. Analysts have different views on the size of a possible fiscal stimulus package, but the general expectation is that additional stimulus on the fiscal side will be the next major move. Top leaders last month pledged to deploy necessary spending to meet its economic growth target of around 5% this year. Tan Sihui, CNA, Beijing.
German's sports car maker Porsche logs a 29% drop in sales in China for the first 9 months of this year. The report comes a day after luxury German automakers BMW and Mercedes announced lower results in China as consumers tightened their purse strings amid economic uncertainty. Now, BMW said its third quarter sales in China slumped nearly 30% on year to about 148,000 units. Mercedes-Benz also posting weak sales in the world's biggest auto market during the same period, notching a 13% drop on year to around 171,000 cars. Auto demand in China is under pressure amid sluggish growth in the economy. Foreign car makers also have to deal with rising competition as local manufacturers offer cheaper models, especially EVs. The poor performance in China is dragging global sales for these German car makers. Now, Porsche's global sales dipped 7% to about 226,000 between January and September, while BMW and Mercedes-Benz were also not spared. China's ByteDance, the parent of short video app TikTok, may retrench up to several hundred workers globally as it tries to strengthen its operating model for content moderation. Now, TikTok confirms it has laid off workers at its Malaysian unit without specifying the numbers. Earlier reports citing unnamed sources said that more than 700 workers, most of whom were in the firm's content moderation operations, were let go. Now, ByteDance is trying to shift its focus towards greater use of AI in content moderation. TikTok uses a mix of automated detection and human moderators to review content posted on the site. It plans to invest $2 billion globally this year in trust and safety initiatives. ByteDance employs more than 110,000 staff globally. The job cuts in Malaysia also follows greater regulatory pressure on global tech firms. The Malaysian government has asked social media operators to apply for an operating license by January as part of efforts to combat cyber offences. After reporting a sharp increase in harmful social media content earlier this year, Malaysia urged firms, including TikTok, to step up monitoring on their platforms. South Korea's central bank has cut its benchmark interest rate for the first time in more than 3 years by a 0.25 percentage point. The long-awaited policy pivot is the first by the Bank of Korea since it raised rates from a record low of 0.5% back in August of 2021 to exit from a pandemic-era stimulus. It now joins its global peers in embarking on an easing cycle after the housing market showed signs of cooling and inflation dropped well below its official target. But authorities accompany the move with words of caution, saying that the Bank of Korea will thoroughly assess the trade-offs. And it comes as home prices in the capital remains elevated, and the country's ratio of household debt to its GDP is among the highest in the developed world. And some analysts say that further cuts in the near term are unlikely. Checking in on market reaction, the Kospi shedding early gains to end the day largely flat. What the Korean won, well, that is weaker against the greenback, 1,350.69 to the dollar. Remember, the South Korean currency has been gaining against the U.S. Fed's September rate cut, and it has risen around 4% since touching its weakest level in mid-April this year. And more stock market action. Japan's Nikkei 225 advancing 0.6% to close at a 2-week high. The gains coming mainly from index heavyweight fast retailing, which jumped more than 6%. The owner of the Uniqlo brand said yesterday it booked record profits for a third straight year. And that'll do it for the business news. So, Sally, it's back to you.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Coming up next on East Asia tonight, the ASEAN Summit is ending with global conflicts and regional tensions on the forefront of talks. And I will be speaking with Sharon Xia after this break. Stay tuned for that. Chinese Premier Li Qiang has asked Tokyo to meet Beijing halfway and keep relations on track. In talks he held with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, Li said he hoped the sides can strengthen dialogue and cooperation. Japanese atomic bomb survivor organization Nihon Hidankyo has won the Nobel Peace Prize in recognition of the organization's efforts to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons. Responding to the announcement, the organization said that atomic weapons don't bring peace. And global conflicts and regional tensions on the forefront of talks today as ASEAN is set to conclude its 3-day regional summit in Laos. The 10-member bloc has been unable to push through resolutions on some difficult regional issues, such as easing tensions in the South China Sea. And for more analysis, let's bring in Sharon Seah, Coordinator and Senior Fellow of the ASEAN Studies Centre, IC's Yusof Ishak Institute. Well, thanks for joining us this evening, Sharon. First up, I thought we'll start with the big picture question. As ASEAN leaders met with their US as well as East Asian counterparts, were there any surprises or notable outcomes that you've observed from those conversations they've had?
So there's no geopolitical black swan event. I think Laos can heave a great sigh of relief. But geopolitics continued to dominate those meetings. And we can see from there that the intractable positions over Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Hamas, Myanmar and South China Sea continue to be unresolved among ASEAN member states as well as between ASEAN and its partners.
Right. Those issues, I mean, like South China Sea, it's a very complex situation. But I thought I'd bring our attention to the Philippine President Marcos's public challenge over the South China Sea tensions at the ASEAN Summit. And what impact do you think this would have on ASEAN's collective stance on the issue?
Yeah, the South China Sea is always the elephant in the room, isn't it? So President Marcos raised the issue of the tense situation during the 27th ASEAN-China Summit, and several of the ASEAN member states spoke up about this issue as well. So I think it really, I won't call it a public challenge per se. I mean, where else could President Marcos have raised it except at the ASEAN-China Summit? I think it does betray the Philippines' frustration at the situation. ASEAN itself is also worried about a possible outbreak, whether accidental, intended or not, in the South China Sea, and has found itself unable or even unwilling to intervene. So instead, the focus for ASEAN has been almost solely on the negotiations of the Code of Conduct. But I think we shouldn't just pay attention to only what President Marcos said at the start. He also said at the end of his intervention that the Philippines commits itself to deepening and expanding ASEAN-China relations in a comprehensive manner. So I think we can take comfort perhaps in that Philippines is trying to take a very holistic view of this.
And in terms of negotiations on the Code of Conduct, I mean, where are we now at this point?
Well, we are still negotiating it. Unfortunately, we haven't heard very much in terms of progress in there. There are several issues that's holding it back. But ASEAN's not giving up. ASEAN's still, plodding along and hoping that we can get a resolution to the Code of Conduct very soon.
Right. And as these countries are raising their issues with the Chinese Premier Li Qiang, right? I mean, he's sort of been saying that let's blame the external forces for interfering in regional affairs. And I'm wondering, Sharon, how would you interpret that statement?
I think this kind of framing of developments taking place at the behest of certain external powers is actually code for the US and its allies, saying that Southeast Asians are continuing to act in certain ways at their behest. But Southeast Asia is no longer a battleground for external powers, and neither are its countries' proxies. So this is an outdated Cold War view of the region being played around by the powers. And this view belittles ASEAN's agency and autonomy in its own regional affairs. I mean, ASEAN has been forging its path to peace and stability since 1967. It uses a mixture of diplomatic, political, and economic cooperation intra-regionally, also extra-regionally. I think we can safely say that ASEAN has a track record in deciding how and when it wants to engage with external partners. For instance, in the way that it paved the way to the Paris Accords of 1991, and how ASEAN welcomed its former foe, Vietnam, into the fold. I think this speaks for itself.
What then do you make of the new Japanese Prime Minister, Ishiba? He's proposed this Asian NATO for collective security. I'm wondering how feasible do you think it is, considering, ASEAN has traditionally emphasized about being neutral?
Yeah, the Japanese Prime Minister's controversial suggestion of an Asian NATO actually prompted strong reactions from around the region. There is little risk appetite for collective security in the way that NATO functions. I mean, the question is security against who or against what? Back in 1954, there was an attempt to create a Southeast Asia Treaty Organization called SEATO, comprising the US, UK, France, and several Southeast Asian countries, and that was to counter the ideological spread of communism. But SEATO didn't survive, and you can tell that by that, right, ASEAN countries would be very wary of any actions that can be perceived as containing any particular country. So I would say this idea really wouldn't fly with the ASEAN leaders.
Good to know, Sharon. I want to move on and talk about ASEAN trade because there are some numbers here I want to share that ASEAN's trade with China actually skyrocketed from 235 billion to nearly 700 billion last year alone. That's quite a big jump. Do you think then the bloc can actually somehow leverage this strong economic relationship to push for better terms on or concessions on regional security issues, for instance?
ASEAN and China, as you rightly pointed out, they are actually each other's largest trading partners. We have a very mature economic relationship with China. So we are expecting that there will be an ASEAN-China FTA 3.0 next year. China is also engaged in the RCEP, and China has applied to join the CPTPP. So that relationship is very strong, right? But insofar as leveraging, I don't think the bloc has succeeded in leveraging this relationship for greater regional stability. A collective unified stance on engagement with China is simply not there, as evidenced by the different positions we talked about in the South China Sea. And some smaller ASEAN member states may fear bilateral economic repercussions, or some may not even have, connected the dots with the regional security issues yet. So I think there's a lot that can be done. There's certainly leverage, but it's up to ASEAN whether they want to pull those levers.
All right, let's just move on to Malaysia because, it's getting ready to take on the ASEAN chairmanship. So, Sharon, what do you think its top priorities should be to move the region forward, or do you think it's going to be same old, same old?
As we were talking, the theme has been released. Malaysia's theme is inclusivity and sustainability. There are high expectations of Malaysia, it being a founding member, and Prime Minister Anwar himself, an experienced hand in international affairs. So the first priority, I think, would be to set ASEAN's house in order, strengthen ASEAN unity. I mean, many of these issues that is intractable is really because of the lack of unity. And the most immediate issue for the bloc is the ongoing Myanmar crisis. Malaysia will have to find a viable pathway to bring all the parties to the table on this issue, because Myanmar's troubles are affecting unity, and also it can spill over to regional security for the region. So this is the only way for ASEAN to be relevant, is to be relevant to itself by solving this internal challenge. And also not forgetting the issue of the Rohingya refugees will be important to Malaysia as well. And the second one is actually to maintain centrality, right? I mean, we've been talking about centrality for the longest time in external relations. I think in that respect, Malaysia have to balance ASEAN's economic relationship with China, as we also talked about earlier, and the security concerns that's going on in the South China Sea. Itself being a claimant state to the South China Sea, and also being cognizant of other ASEAN member states' concerns in that area, I think Malaysia will have to balance between defending ASEAN's interests vis-a-vis its own interests in stronger ties with China. And the last one is to accelerate the pace of economic integration, of course, by concluding the Digital Economy Framework Agreement, upgrading the FTAs, various FTAs, and articulating an ASEAN post-2025 vision.
Well, it sounds like Malaysia has a lot to do in order to set the house in order. Thanks so very much for sharing. Sharon Seah from the ASEAN Studies Centre at IC's Yusof Ishak Institute. Singapore Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat says that the island state has much to learn from Japan's innovative approaches to the challenges of an aging population, in particular programs that promote healthy longevity and advanced dementia care. Well, he made those comments on social media as he wraps up his working visit to Japan. During the trip, DPM Heng visited research and scientific institutes, including the National Centre for Geriatrics and Gerontology in Aichi. And he said he is looking forward to deepening collaborations and advancing expertise from both sides for mutual benefit. DPM Hing also had talks with several Japanese firms, institutes and universities to explore new opportunities in areas including sustainable finance, technology and entrepreneurship. And he also presided over the launch of a National University of Singapore Ideas Incubator in Nagoya and met with Aichi Governor Omura Hideaki. He returns to Singapore today. The 2024 Nobel Peace Prize has been awarded to the Japanese atomic bomb survivor organization Nihon Hidankyo. The Nobel Committee says the Japanese organization is reminding the world of why nuclear weapons must never be used again through the testimonies of survivors from the Nagasaki and Hiroshima bombings. Responding to the announcement, the organization said in a statement that atomic weapons do not bring peace. Just like other Nobel Prize winners, Nihon Hidankyo will receive $1.1 million in prize money and a gold medal on December 10th. Commenting on the win, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba said that the Nihon Hidankyo has spent many years working towards the abolition of nuclear weapons and that it is extremely meaningful for the prize to be awarded to the organization. Ursula von der Leyen, who is the president of the European Commission, also welcomed the award. She said it sends a powerful message as the spectre of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bombings still looms over humanity. The Nobel Peace Prize remains one of the most prestigious awards an individual or organization can win. And in 1990, Mikhail Gorbachev was lauded for helping end the World Cold War and bringing radical change in East-West relations. Myanmar's former and now detained leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, won an award for her non-violent struggle to bring democracy in her country. And we have former U.S. President Barack Obama. He also received the honors for strengthening international diplomacy. Like tonight, there have also been organizations who won the award, such as the European Union and the World Food Programme. But just because peace prizes are given out doesn't mean the world is at peace. During World War I and II, fewer Nobel Prizes were awarded. 2024 alone has been battered with conflicts at the world's most treacherous flashpoints, ranging from the ongoing strikes between Israel and Lebanon to the crisis in Myanmar. Another controversial aspect to the renowned prize is who is on the receiving end. In 3 separate occasions, the Norwegian Nobel Committee disagreed so much that some members withdrew in protest. While controversies remain on how the awarding committee defines peace and quantifies one's accomplishments, the Nobel Peace Prize remains a touted award, paving the way for more global contributions. Turning to the U.S. presidential election, and fresh polls suggesting that Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Donald Trump are in a dead heat with voters in 7 battleground states. Now, one of those states is Pennsylvania, and history shows that winning there is usually a sure ticket to the White House. This year, one issue has been dominating the campaign, and that's the future of fracking. Benji Haya explains.
Almost 400 kilometers from the heart of American democracy in Washington, D.C., lies Washington County. It's here where real power lies, because it's in counties like this that the presidential election will be ultimately won or lost. If you drill down into what matters most in these sprawling hills of rural Pennsylvania, you find that fracking is the hot-button issue. The extraction process that blasts natural resources from the ground has popped up almost everywhere in this part of the nation. It's helped make the United States the largest oil and gas producer in the world. But it's also become a polarizing political point in this campaign.
Harris will ban all fracking.
Will you commit to implementing a federal ban on fracking your first day in office?
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
Donald Trump has slammed Kamala Harris for those comments that she made during her first bid for the presidency years ago.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
She's since U-turned, promising not to ban a practice which helps fuel the economy in Pennsylvania.
Trump, and I approve this message.
Yet her initial remarks have stuck in voters' minds, and her change of stance sits in stark contrast to Trump's full-throated endorsement.
On day one, I will tell the frackers and energy workers of Pennsylvania to drill, baby, drill.
I love fracking.
Donald Trump's word is enough to convince Mark Caskey, who spoke at one of his many rallies in Pennsylvania. Even though oil and gas production rose under Joe Biden, reaching record heights, Mark still believes a Harris administration would shut his industry down. And as somebody whose steel business relies on and serves the fracking sector, he trusts Trump. Life was good, he says, during the former president's first term.
We had millions upon millions of dollars in contracts coming in to build infrastructure for natural gas. And he continued to support our industries. He continued to support exports. We can do whatever we want. We have the energy right under our feet.
Rigs like this are dotted all across the county, all across the state. It feels like round here you pass a well site every few streets. There are literally thousands of them. It just goes to show how prevalent fracking is in this part of the country. Washington County has the most fracked wells anywhere in Pennsylvania, directly and indirectly supporting tens of thousands of jobs statewide. But don't think for a second that backing fracking guarantees you votes in this fossil fuel hub. With emissions contributing to climate change and toxic fumes even causing an increased chance of cancer amongst locals, some residents want Kamala Harris to revert to her original policy due to environmental and health concerns.
You know, it's destroyed a lot of our landscaping. It's polluted our air. It's polluted our water. It's, ruined communities. It's divided communities. There's, neighbors just don't talk to neighbors anymore.
The presidential nominee's positions on fracking have both attracted and alienated Americans. Feelings on all sides run deep in the tussle to turn this razor-tight state red or blue. Benji Hire, CNA, in Washington County, Pennsylvania.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, hundreds of thousands of children in China go missing each year. But the vastness of the country makes it virtually impossible to find them. We look at their parents' relentless search for their loved ones in our CNA Plus segment next. You're watching East Asia Tonight on CNA. Now, CNA's award-winning documentary series, No Ordinary Rescue, is back with a new season of people and wildlife rescues across Asia. More than 200,000 children reportedly go missing each year in China, mostly boys who are abducted and trafficked for money. Well, in this episode, we bring you the story of Du Xiaohua, whose son went missing 13 years ago, and he has been relentlessly searching for him ever since.
每一次踏上这个寻找小米奇的征程，总感觉这就是最后一次。
那么在我寻找孩子的过程当中，当有人给我们提供线索的时候，对我来说，我肯定也不愿放弃的。
这个是线索，咱不确定他是买，最起码他孩子是要来的，而且来的时候已经5、6岁了。一般要卖的话，都是很小很小的时候卖的，一生下来或者大不了大了1、2个月顶多的。一般5、6岁的孩子，有谁会舍得送灵呢？那肯定就是灵贩子作为嘛。马上就到这个买孩子这户人家的附近了。
我
这是这条线索，这个孩子在这边受苦是不会的，因为他这个买家在这个当地是个比较大的老板。我现在就过去，悄悄的过去打探一下吧，看看能不能看到这个孩子。我们还得找，应该就在这附近了。
所以在城市里边找和在农村里边找相对更困难，
更困难一些。小区里相对我们要核实线索很难，有些小区我们是进不去的。
And that's just a short excerpt of the 5-part documentary, No Ordinary Rescue, which also has stories from Taiwan, Indonesia and Thailand. The series airs today till Tuesday, and you can catch it at 9 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time on CNA, or stream it through video on demand and on CNA Insider's YouTube channel. A South Korean K-pop star, Honey, says that she will testify at a parliament hearing on bullying in the music industry. Now, her decision has shocked a sector known for the tight control it imposes on its stars. The New Jeans band member says that she made that decision without telling her managers or her record label, Edor. Her decisions follows a tumultuous period between her band and the record label. Earlier this year, their mentor, Min Hee-jin, was removed her position over accusations that she planned to make New Jeans and Edor independent of their parent label, Hybe. In a now-deleted YouTube video, the band called for Min's reinstatement and made claims of workplace harassment. The row within the company is what led to lawmakers wanting to audit workplace harassment in the music industry. Nobuyo Oyama, the Japanese actor who was the voice of Doraemon, has died, and she was 90. For a quarter of a century until 2005, Oyama lent her voice to the cartoon cat robot beloved by children all around the world. Doraemon is still on air as one of the longest-running Japanese anime series. The story revolves around a blue cat from the 22nd century that travels back in time to help a lazy schoolboy overcome the trials of everyday life. While Oyama's successor has played the role since 2005, for those who grew up watching Doraemon, her voice remains the definitive one. Nobuyo Oyama's agency says she passed away due to old age. And that's all we've got for you on East Asia Tonight this Friday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. You can also find us on Facebook, on YouTube, and on X. Thanks for watching.